Here to the seminar today. I'm very pleased to have as our guests Dr. Bettina Fischer-Genz and Professor Hermann Genz here, two archaeologists from the university, the American University in Beirut, which is very nice because they are neighbors, and not just neighbors, they are good neighbors. We have, as the Cyprus Institute, I think for 3 years now, a collaboration agreement, a memorandum of understanding, and that goes across a number of fields and interests, including archaeology, which is manifest here in this current lecture, where we are trying to develop a local network and establishing collaboration, not just on paper, but in reality, which we know is much more difficult in COVID times and in times of political and other upheavals and problems. But so I'm very pleased to have our two colleagues here, both lecturing professor at the, as I said, AUB in archaeology. Between them, they cover the whole, well, a good chunk of archaeological history from the Bronze Age through to the medieval period. Bettina actually, I understand, has a good footing also in Cypriot archaeology, having done your PhD here a few years ago from the university in Aix-en-Provence. Before then you went to AUB. But today we are looking forward to learn about the survey project in Jebel Musa, which is, as any survey project, typically a very interesting exercise, because you get a good depth and range of different evidence and different remains, and then one can focus and understand the landscape as such and see well beyond the individual site, but really understand what the overall economic conditions and political conditions may have been at the time and how that is shaped by the landscape. So we will have a team exercise, actually, if I understand it correctly. The two of you, you're going to alternate with your presentation, and then there will be a third part at the end from a colleague who is still in Lebanon. No, she's in the US, okay. Even more demonstrating the benefits of online and email communication and so on. But I don't want to hold it up any longer. Bettina, please do start.
Hello. It is really an immense pleasure for us to be here and also to see people actually in real life. This has been a trying 1.5 years for all of us. So this is a treat, and I thank Thilo Reren especially for inviting us here and for sparking with this small lecture the collaboration that we, and the collaborative programs that we want to develop together. And this is our little introduction to what we have found in the mountains of Lebanon, what we think the significance is of it, and how we may proceed from there to develop research programs together. So first of all, in this case, I start with a thanks, because there's nothing we could have done without the support of the Direction Générale des Antiquités, under their director Sarkis El-Khouri, and especially our representative Tanya Zaven, who is very helpful and knowledgeable. And then the project itself owes to 100% to Claude Doumer-Serral and Pierre Doumet and Joël Barakat, who, Claude Doumer-Serral is a very well-known archaeologist working in Saïda. That is her project on the coast, but through family connections, she was very early on asked to consult on the things that the Association for the Preservation of Jabal Musa found in their biosphere reserve. As an archaeologist, she came to consult with them, explain to them, prepare even the initial accessibility of archaeological sites to basically trails that were used to explore this mountain. And Pierre Doumet is the president of the association, and Joël Barakat is our very valued contact, and she's now in Cyprus because she came for 3 years to Cyprus to work here, but she's still in charge of the biosphere reserve from here. And then the team, of course, so we've been working, today is a historic day because it's been exactly 5 years since Hermann and I first set foot in Jabal Musa. We were invited on the 22nd of November in 2016 to visit with Pierre and Joël the landscape, the site, what they had found, and then we started thinking about what we could do to contribute to their efforts to better understand the long history of use of the mountain, of the resources, and the human impact on the mountain through time. And our team, I will not mention all of them, but here is everyone that has worked with us during the years. Now comes Hermann.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Again, I just want to say that I'm very, very pleased and honored to be here. Thank you for the invitation. So, maybe just a very, very brief introduction into the geography. Anybody coming to Lebanon, either by ship or by plane, will immediately notice the prominence of the mountains. We have two major mountain chains running parallel to each other, Mount Lebanon in the west, bordering the coast, and then separated from Mount Lebanon by the Bekaa Valley, the Anti-Lebanon in the east. And these mountain chains are actually just part of larger geological structures extending southwards and into Israel-Palestine and northwards into Syria, but it's actually in Lebanon that these mountains are most prominent. The highest spot actually of the whole mountain chain, Kornet es-Sauda, is in Lebanon and reaches a height of 3,088 meters. So that basically means more than half of Lebanon's territory is consisting of mountains and high mountains. And the Lebanese are, of course, very proud of their mountains. You can do lots of wonderful things there, skiing, hiking, and so on and so forth. But very, very interesting, archaeologically speaking, we hardly know anything. When we look at the history of archaeology in Lebanon, most prominent excavations are either along the coast or in the Bekaa, but the mountains themselves are virtually terra incognita, and here I've just shown the 5 projects, there may be 2 or 3 more, which in recent years have started to look at the mountains. These mountains, of course, are very, very important for understanding the history and archaeology of Lebanon. First of all, from a geographical point of view, they basically dictate a north-south movement of everything. East-west connections are not impossible, but difficult. And second of all, it's the resources that these mountains provide. We'll come to that in a minute. One thing that we see when looking at better researched areas in the southern Levant, for instance, that it's only gradually with time that the mountainous regions are settled. And in the southern Levant, that happens in the Chalcolithic, early Bronze Age, so let's say 5th, 4th, beginning of 3rd millennia. We seem to have a similar pattern in Lebanon with, for instance, Yanouch, a French project, having evidence for early Bronze Age presence in the mountains. Khalat Aisha has even some Chalcolithic material, but the rest of the sites you see here on the map mainly have later periods. So we still have a lot to do. So why are the mountains so important for Lebanon? It's one of the very, very prominent raw materials, timber. And not just any timber, but high-quality timber. It's the coniferous trees, mainly cedars, but also firs, cypress, and so on and so forth, which constitute one of the natural wealths of Lebanon. So here, the emblematic cedar trees, of course, which nowadays are restricted to the higher ranges of the mountains, around 2,000 meters in height. But we, at least theoretically, know that in the past the extent of the cedar forest was much greater. So one of the things we'll have to look at in the upcoming years is to try to reconstruct the extent of the cedar forests. Analysis of wood samples has only started in recent years. Here we have two of the sites I've worked on, Fadaousk Farabida on the Lebanese coast and Baalbek in the Bekaa, where we have wood samples being analyzed, and in addition to, let's say, the very local things like olive and oak, we always have a good portion of cedars, cedar wood, and the cedar definitely does neither grow in the coastal plain nor in the Bekaa. These are evidences for connections to the mountains. And we have further evidence when we look at historical records and iconographic evidence from Egypt, the New Kingdom. We have evidence that the Egyptians imported high-quality timber from Lebanon to build ships, temple roofs, palace roofs, and so on and so forth. And the same was done by the Assyrians in the Iron Age. Both Egypt and Mesopotamia lack high-quality timber, so whenever they needed timber, Lebanon was one of the places they could come to. So it's definitely the timber that plays an important role. We do know that, for instance, in the Hellenistic period, wars were fought over the control of the forests, because who controlled these forests could build ships, warships, and therefore control the Mediterranean. That at some point problems arose is obvious from one very, very peculiar set of sources that's, I think, unique to Lebanon, the so-called Roman forest inscriptions, all dating to the reign of Emperor Hadrian, so early 2nd century AD. We have, I think, more than 500 of these in the Lebanese mountains, and all in, let's say, a very, very abbreviated text, basically telling us that 4 species of trees are reserved for the emperor, the others are free for public use. Unfortunately, we never get to know which species are protected, but we can easily guess that cedar, pine, fir, and cypress should be among them somehow. So the high quality timber, so these forest inscriptions show us that, well, Hadrian didn't protect the forest because he loved it so much, but for economic and military interests. So, as I said, who controlled these valuable resources, controlled basically the shipbuilding activities. And I think with that, I'll hand over to Bettina again.
Welcome back. So, first of all, when you look at the map of Lebanon, just to show you where we are located between the Nah Ibrahim, which you see right here, and the so-called Nah al-Dahab, the golden river valley golden because of the leaves, the golden leaves of the trees that fall about now into the river. And the Jabal Musa, it's in a long stretched valley that goes all the way down to the coast, of course. But then there sits this mountain between these really important valleys, and then continues, of course, the routes continue up towards the highest peak, or the peaks of the Lebanon mountains, and then you go into the Bekaa. So there is, you have to imagine a route going from the sea past this mountain on both sides towards the higher altitude and then into the Bekaa. And we are dealing with altitudes here at the lowest end. We're roughly 350 above sea level, and on the highest point we are at roughly 1,700 meters ASL, just to situate you what to expect also in terms of climatology. Then this is a view, so from the west, basically, this is a view from the south. We have here the mountain, Nar al-Dhahat, Nahal Ibrahim, and here, Orne de Dare, the site that I'm going to present now, because this is the site that we worked out. We did a survey with the team, Jennie Bradbury from Bryn Mawr, with Stephen McPhillips from at the time, the Honor Frost Foundation, and others within the Jabal Musa Biosphere Reserve, but this site belongs also to the Biosphere Reserve, although technically it's next to the mountain, and it controls, as we will see, some parts of this road. And just to situate you, so we are right here, Orne de Dare, Beirut is here, Byblos is here, and this is the valley where we would then go into the Bekaa, passing by these mountains. What we found originally, you can see here on this aerial picture, this is the so-called site of Orne de Dare. It's a rocky outcrop that just stands almost naturally fortified with karstic rocks around it, and what we see on top of it is the architecture that's preserved. But at the foot of even that small outcrop, we have one building. You see in the back of the building, you see a lime kiln that's, of course, much later in date, but we have one very beautifully and massively constructed building that unfortunately was destroyed below the level of the floors, but the walls are almost a meter thick. So we assume, you see here the interior excavated. It was also clean, unfortunately. There were, I think, 103 shirts, all in all Roman, but all of the beautiful type that can be anywhere between the 1st century and the 8th century, storage vessels without any distinctive features, but Roman in time. So we have, if you look at this is what the Roman road looks like that goes uphill past this site. It is, we have also in the survey, of which I was part in 2018 before my knees gave out, we did find other stretches of this Roman road, and so we can be fairly certain about the date. It starts for sure in this phase, let's say almost built up phase in the Roman period, but it's much older than that, we know that. But you have to imagine caravans of little donkeys or whatever, slowly plodding up their way another 10 kilometers until they either stop on this side of the mountain or pass over the mountain into the Bekaa. Then what we found exactly 5 years ago when we were introduced to this site, on top of it is actually massive architectural remains, mainly of the Crusader period. It's a very targeted period, 70 years roughly from the pottery. Stephen McPhillips is our specialist there, and he was able, even although the pottery study is not entirely finished, to really 12th, 13th century, for not even a century, this part of the mountains became very important in the contested areas between the different Crusader kingdoms and remaining populations. And so for a brief period in time, a Crusader garrison, fortified small place, was set on this mountain, and most of the architecture, as we will see, reused Roman Byzantine architecture that was just below. So the stones are absolutely massive that are used in the Crusader period, and that accounts for some of the problems we had. But what would archaeology be without a few problems? So here just a map of a multi-room building that you can see here. This is where we mostly worked. There are other remains here that are more disturbed through looting at a later period. Some people during the end of the second millennium BC, so around 1980 to 90, drove with bulldozers through the site. And so there is quite a bit of destruction, but we have a very well-preserved part here, and we have another lime kiln here and other lime kilns dotted around the mountain. What we first did in 2017 in the summer is a small test trench that went all the way here through the middle of this multi-period building to figure out the phasing, because we wanted to know. We saw, of course, on the surface the pottery. It was clear we had Roman, it was clear we had Crusader period, but to our great surprise, Middle Bronze Age immediately became apparent in as soon as we started cleaning off the massive collapse of the Crusader architecture within the rooms. We came to Middle Bronze Age. And this is, of course, goes back to what we've been talking about, the long-standing traditions of using these resources, of going through these pathways through the mountain that are not just simple pathways, but roads used to get the wood down to the coast where it would be shipped off to destinations around the Mediterranean. And of course, these interconnected economies mean also that we should expect more architectural remains in the mountains if we just start looking for them. What we first found then was, interestingly, a vessel here, and around there was nothing in it, no ash, nothing, and the pottery around it was Middle Bronze Age. So our first thought was, oh, we have a cult stand, or we have a tanur, a kiln, but we were startled that there was not really any remains that went with it. And later on, in our newer excavations in the room next to it, we found then finally in situ pots that were used for some kind of productive activity. It's half filled with ash, but all of them are set the wrong way. They're reused storage jars set the wrong upside down with an opening at the bottom. So we still have to figure out what exactly went on there. But that means that now we know that we actually floors are in the mountains. We're not the only excavation that has a hard time finding floors. Jause, that has been going on, our sister project in the Metten, has been working since 15 years, and I think they found their first floor after 9 years. So it's not just us, although I really started doubting us. So we now know that this, what we thought in the first year to be Middle Bronze Age, because it was sitting on Middle Bronze Age pottery, is really Roman Byzantine, probably somewhere between the 5th to 6th, 7th century. These are installations that go with it. I will show that in a second. So here we see a part of this multi-room building. And originally we worked here. You see area 2.6, tomb, area 2.3. You see 2.8 is sort of connected. It all goes uphill, so this is why we have so many small units. And this area 2.7 with the two vessels in situ and a platform that was probably also used for some kind of workspace. What we also then immediately found were the layers of Middle Bronze Age. And here, Hermann comes in.
Okay. Yeah, so Bettina already mentioned that Middle Bronze Age pottery started to show up already in the very first season of 2017, and over the years the material became more and more. We actually have evidence, at least from the quantity of Middle Bronze Age pottery, for quite substantial activities there. I think there are hundreds of sherds that clearly can be dated to the Middle Bronze Age. But so far, we have not been able to associate this pottery with architecture. So there are several, what is clear, if you look at the situation here, the layers containing the Middle Bronze Age pottery always are below the Roman Byzantine architecture. There are several possibilities here now. The areas where we have reached the Middle Bronze Age are simply too small and the architecture is elsewhere. B, maybe there never was a permanent habitation in the Middle Bronze Age. We will come back to this issue with the next slide when I just will detail some ideas about the Middle Bronze Age habitation here. The only thing that we have are some burned areas, probably representing hearths or something like that, and interestingly, a number of lumps of burnt clay, which may also indicate that we are not dealing with stone architecture, but maybe with wattle and daub huts, which were then coated with mud. It's all very, very conjectural at the moment, but we simply need more information. So, coming to the pottery that we have, the date is relatively clear. It's, I think, a relatively homogeneous group, somehow at the transition from the Middle Bronze Age 1 to the Middle Bronze Age 2, so around 1800 BC. But what is interesting, it's not the regular settlement material that we know, for instance, from the coast or from the Bekaa. What we have are almost exclusively storage jars. There are a few cooking pots. There are very, very few, let's say, fineware vessels, vessels for eating and drinking purposes like bowls and jugs and so on. In, let's say, normal habitation contexts, the percentages look quite different, where you always have almost the same amount of cooking pots and storage jars. So that already tells us we are probably dealing with a special purpose site here because of the large amount of storage jars. Here, this is not from Ornette-et-Dare. It's one of the storage jars that was found along the coast, but what we have from Ornette-et-Dare are exactly the same types. So these two-handled storage jars, easily usable for transport. Another interesting thing is that from the soil samples we took from the Middle Bronze Age contexts, we hardly have any remains of food plants. It's a lot of charcoal, so woody species, but very, very limited evidence of food plants like grains or any other things that you normally associate with habitation contexts. So apparently food preparation was not taking place here. And that's where we, for the time being, just speculate maybe this site was never permanently inhabited, but people from the coast came up during special times of the year to collect the forest products, and timber, as I already said in the introduction, is one of them. Another commodity that was highly prized are tree resins, greatly sought after by the Egyptians, who used them for mummification purposes and so on. And we have evidence from later periods like the Uluburun shipwreck, for instance, where we have these storage jars full of tree resin. So tree resin was also one of the products that was obtained in the mountains, and that may actually explain the large number of storage jars here. And so food production did not actually take place at the site. The people, the expeditions were supplied by the coastal settlements with ready-made food and so on. That's why we apparently have so little evidence for food preparation activities. So that's, for the time being, I think the best explanation we have how to explain A, the absence of architecture, B, the large number of storage jars, C, the absence of food preparation activities, and so on. So just, let's say, an activity that was probably restricted to a few weeks, maybe a few months per year, but not permanent habitation.
That is, for the Middle Bronze Age, already, we have also, of course, the animal bones that Mahmoud Mardini has been studying for us and is still studying for us. So hunting is, we see also in the remains from the animal bones a similar pattern that animals were, the slaughter patterns also indicate more a seasonal use of the site, and the presence of hunted animals definitely supports what Hermann said about some of the food things coming from the coast with them and being supplemented by what was available on the site. And just one thing that Hermann intimated but didn't say, so Tel Fadous Kvarabida is on the coast. Baalbek is in the Bekaa, and some of the pottery traditions are slightly different in the Middle Bronze Age, and the interesting thing is our site connects them, which is not surprising, but it is a beautiful validation of these connective ways through the mountains that connect the Bekaa to the coast via these mountain sites. Did I say that correctly? Yes. Good. Now, after the first year, when we had our sequence established, of course, some scientific goals were formulated, and one of them was that we really wanted to access a wider area of the Middle Bronze Age occupation in order to understand it better, its nature and economic scope. We will see the problems we encountered with that lofty goal. We were, of course, we wanted to determine the stratigraphic and functional sequence of especially the Roman tomb I'm going to present to you now, because now how did the site evolve? There must be a gap as far as we can see. We have no evidence of late Bronze Age, of Iron Age. So the next sequence that appears is Roman architecture built beautifully with the usual foundations, not too thick, but all of local stone. And we don't know, of course, about the upper structures, but from what I've seen in the Baalbek survey, it's entirely possible that we're dealing with complete stone architecture. It's not, we have very well preserved sites in the anti-Lebanon that are only using for the roof some timbers, but mainly it's all built of stone. It may be different here, we don't know, but we have no evidence so far for any clay or brick being used in the constructions. And now, of course, we found this tomb that was very inconvenient. Knowing my Romans, normally they would not just have a tomb, and a tomb crammed full of people in 3 different installments over the time between the 2nd century and the 6th century AD. There were 3 events of people being buried. In the first event, 9 people were buried together. In the second, 1 or 2 over possibly longer. And then again, an event at the beginning of the 6th century where another, I think 7 or 8 were put in the tomb. So how do we reconcile this with a permanent settlement that is not supposed to live, to be next door as neighbor within one building with the deceased? We first, of course, thought of religious communities who might be tempted to do something like that, but then there the idea would normally be to worship one holy person in the mountains. We have a lot of high places that cater to this type of not a real tomb, more a memorial of an important person. Here, it's really a very practical pushing in of deceased people. So we might have an epidemic event at some point. We might have also phases of where the site was left for several decades, but we cannot, unfortunately, our archaeological record in terms of pottery does not give us this fine layered chronology to explain to us exactly how the use and reuse of the building answers to these intermittent periods where the tomb was opened and closed again. But it is a sealed tomb, so it's not that. At least we can ascertain that when it was closed, you could, if you were putting your mind to it, ignore it for a generation or two. The other thing is we, of course, needed to do surveying, establish the whole site and all the architectural features distinguishable, and also understand, and this was one of the things that we kept in mind, outdoor spaces and indoor spaces. There might be, we have a multi-room building, yes, but we also have an elevation. The building goes up the hill, so not necessarily all the walls we see and all the thresholds lead to another room in a house. It might be a courtyard, it might be some other features, so we're still trying to work on that. And of course, the analysis of animal and plant remains, because we are looking for the economy of this site. So this is one of our best material to trace what people actually did during our architectural phases. And then for the Crusader phase, very logically, the defensive aspects that are present at the site. Now, when you look from above, this is almost at the end of our excavations. The tomb, you see the covering stones. We removed 3 of the covering stones, but basically it was covered with slabs of stone, and it is partly built into the bedrock. So there is, we think, this is our working theory now, that at some point in the 2nd century, when there was this event where 9 people had to be buried rather quickly, they do not show any sign of wounds or military action upon them, so it is more likely that we're dealing with some epidemic or some other way to die. So the part of this tomb was really in the rock, and then the entranceway was consolidated with large stones and then covered with these stone slabs. And this whole building around it evolved from the pottery earlier and later. So it is sitting awkwardly in the middle of it. We have then this room that I said was used for these industrial installations with this, but we have block doors. So also the building underwent a lot of modifications. We have 2 block doors that I will show you now that are probably from the pottery somewhere already in the 3rd century. The blockage happened 3rd or 4th century. So we are still a bit dazzled by the fact that one small unit like this has been reused so thoroughly over 400 or 500 years, and possibly by different parts of population. Some might have come just for a bit, some might have stayed longer. This is something we need to keep in mind with our work there. Just to show you here, I say Jause, and this is our, as I said, the other project that is in the mountains and that is very worth looking at when we try to compare. Jause is bigger than Ornate there, much bigger. It has a large Byzantine factory of olive oil production, and also Jause has a real quarry where we find iron-rich minerals. They have all the kilns and all the furnaces that we're looking for in our project. But they also have, of course, domestic architecture from the same time period. And see, we have the same industrial installations. They didn't know what to do with it either. So we still will investigate and try to figure out what was actually produced in these vats. Sometimes we can date a little bit more closely, but this is African red slipware, and it was found just on the floor. Finally, we had a floor of the probably 5th, 6th century, but just in front of the tomb. So again, we are in this complicated point of not knowing how the tomb fits in. Just to show you, this is what the tomb looks like. So this was before we took these stones because they were in danger of falling. So the whole tomb goes this way, and had up to date, I think we're at 18 inhumations over 3 periods of time. The inhumations have little bronze bracelets, little rings, little bells, and a few little pieces of, few juglets of pottery given to them, and that's it. Nothing distinguishing them neither in religious affiliation nor in economic affiliation. This is the closing stone. So here you could open and close the tomb from the outside. And this is our anthropologist, Nada Elias, who was working with several students there in order to get all these skeletons studied and retrieved. And this is basically probably what we think happened. If you look at this room, the tomb is on the right there, awkwardly set in, but nice and contained. And they probably just blocked on both sides. On the other side, there's also a little storage unit, and it was probably just blocked off and ignored for most of the time, and the passageway to the next room just went over this threshold to the higher elevation. Then we have the block doors. I love the block doors. So this is one. You clearly see it. We can't date this blockage, unfortunately, but we think from the pottery it's somewhere in the third, fourth century. And we have the other block door that you see from the outside. And here we think that maybe the very first idea of this building was one big building without all these, with communicating rooms and with a threshold here that led into the building. But nowadays there's another room in front of it. So there is clearly a very first phase that might actually have religious, at least from the layout with the tomb. I'm still tempted to identify it as a first high mountain peak installation that then was later reused for habitation and production. And this is what the room in front of, so the threshold is just over there, what the room then looks like. And here finally, this is a big event because in 2020 finally we found our first Crusader floor preserved. The Crusader floors are almost impossible to find because of this massive architecture that bombarded the layer and often even went through the Roman floors as well. So not just the Crusader floors are mostly not findable. But we have, as an indicator, most of the Crusader architecture used these pillars in the set apart in the rooms. And so now we've managed to at least associate some of those floors with these pillar structures. And this is what floors otherwise look like when you try to find pieces of, it's not floor, it's just pieces of smashed pottery that are more or less a bit more intact. So we have floating floors, which is an embarrassment to archaeology, but it is something in the mountains that probably we just have to accept, that especially with the slow decay of these sites and the massive debris that piles up, it is very hard to get to the floors. But just to show you, this is one area where we're still working now, area 11. We haven't even gotten to the level where the pillars are set. So we're still trying to carefully go down and rescue as much contextual information as we can of the collapse of these buildings. Same here, and just to remind you, so usually we have the lower levels are still Roman, and then they get reused and sometimes a little bit reoriented by the Crusader architecture. Same here, we're almost at the bottom of the pillar, so hopefully a floor will be lurking there or not. This is when we talk about the natural defensive systems. This Stephen McPhillips identified one important axis to the site that was not the main axis, but that became important in the Crusader period. They fortified it, they built structures along the way. He found floor, and of course, again, we have the pillars in these elongated rooms that were specifically, in this case, one phase establishment in the 13th, I think 13th century, early 14th century. And here we can see that the natural fortification of the site was always used, and we assume that probably in the earlier periods that was the same, but now what we see on the outside of these rocks in terms of aménagement is definitely from the Crusader period. And I said we were trying to find better places for the Middle Bronze Age, and we figured maybe we are too low on the site. The highest point of the site, where you can see almost down to the sea and almost down to the upper elevations, is higher up. If you see here on the map, it's right here, the red square. Our main site is down there. So we said maybe we could try to find something up there. We did a survey, a subsurface survey. We collected the pottery, and then we identified one plot where we hoped to get layers of occupation, and unfortunately, it didn't happen. So the only thing we found was bedrock with accumulations of pottery. So people came there and used this high spot probably on the way in and out of the site, but no chance to find any architectural features. And then when I said we were looking also to figure out the adjoining rooms that are not part of this multi-room structure, this is where Hermann excavated in 2020. And again, we have the sequence is clear. We stay with the same sequence. We have Roman and sometimes even rather early Roman from the 1st century AD, but nothing that predates it, and then immediately Middle Bronze Age material, but without any features that were, and the bedrock, as you can see, is always used by all these subsequent building phases. They integrate the bedrock very smoothly, which accounts probably for a lack of some of our floors, because the Byzantine building had bedrock sticking out in between their work installations. And this is, when I say the site is very well preserved, it is, but it has, of course, these bulldozer pits that were, from what the locals tell us, probably done in the 1970s and 80s up to the 1990s. We're talking the period of the Civil War, and some of our evidence has not survived that, but that is to be expected. This is our part, but as I intimated in the beginning, we're a big team. We have our natural scientists, we have Mahmoud Mardini, we have Claire Mellison, who works on the plant remains. We have the whole survey team that now has been joined also by Astrid Meyer, so Stephen McPhillips and Jennie Bradbury, but then a lot of volunteers, and Astrid Meyer as a historian. They're now working on the archives, on the written archives of especially the Ottoman period, but also earlier, to understand more about the economy of the mountain. And now Jennie, in her original voice, will introduce you to the survey results, which are very, very intriguing. Where are they? Here. Okay. Now.
Hi everyone, it's Jennie here, and I'm really sorry I can't be with you today, but I just wanted to kind of join in.
Wait, no, yeah, is it loud enough?
Hi everyone, it's Jennie here, and I'm really sorry I can't be with you today, but I just wanted to kind of join in virtually and tell you a little bit about the survey that we've been carrying out across the Jebel Musa region, and in particular talk a little bit about where we found kind of slag material across the mountain, and in kind of what context and what we found it kind of associated with, and what our kind of current thinking about this material is based on the kind of survey. Bettina will be able to answer kind of any questions because she's been part of the survey, but I've also kind of included my email at the end just in case there are any kind of more detailed questions I can answer. So to put it in a little bit of a broader context, we've been carrying out the survey across Jebel Musa since 2018 and finished our most recent season actually this past summer. And it's a survey that combines remote sensing and also ground survey, so using kind of satellite imagery, aerial photographs and LiDAR, which we luckily were able to obtain through colleagues. And we really do have a vast array of different types of archaeological evidence from this material, stretching right from the kind of Paleolithic, the Middle Paleolithic period, right up to the kind of 20th century CE. Obviously, with it being a kind of biosphere, we're very interested in kind of archaeology and heritage, and there's been different projects like the Terhune project that I've kind of put there, that have been kind of looking at this idea of kind of built and non-built heritage. But what I want to kind of very much focus on today is that, as I said, this slag material and the other types of evidence that we actually have found from this area for kind of productive or extractive industries or practices that seem to be going on across this forest and mountain area. Hi everyone, it's Jennie here, and I'm really sorry I can't be with you today, but I just wanted to
Hi everyone, it's
join
Jennie
in
here, and I'm really sorry I can't
virtually
be with you
today, but tell you a little bit about the survey that we've been carrying out across the Jebel Musa region, and in particular talk a little bit about where we found kind of slag material across the mountain. And in kind of what context and what we found it kind of associated. So just in case you haven't seen any images, you may have already been treated to some views of Jebel Musa. But just to emphasize that we're dealing with
Yeah, it's very difficult to understand. So she says it more beautifully, but the thing is, if we go to the next slide.
With and what our kind of current thinking about this material is based on the kind of survey. Bettina will be able to answer kind of any questions because she's been part of the survey. But I've also kind of included my email at the end just in case there are any kind of more detailed questions I can answer. So to put it in a little bit of a broader context, we've been carrying out the survey across Jebel Musa since 2018. And
the presentation mode, just show the slide.
Yeah, we'll show the slide. Sorry for that. No, that's mine. The wrong one. Okay. No. Yeah, just.
So just in case you haven't seen any images, you may have already been treated to some views of Jebel Musa. But just to emphasize that we're dealing with an area that in some ways is very different from your...
No, let's just keep it like this without... Okay, now it's quite, so we'll just do it this way. So what she's saying here is, of course, to remind you of the wooded landscape, of the incredible forests that are covering this landscape, and of the difference between areas where there's only tree cultures or trees growing that have been cultured a long time, but also, of course, terrace and other field systems that cover the mountain at accessible locations. And one of the resources that struck us when we started the survey was we found a huge amount of iron slags that were concentrated in different spots. And for us now, of course, the question arose, first of all, where does the raw material come from for these iron slags? What kind of probably primary smelting, but what do the places where this primary smelting happened look like? And how do we integrate that into the general history of the mountain and its use over time? So you see here some of these concentrations, and you see here that we have, in a few cases, usually natural features that are augmented by by stone settings, and we find ash deposits in corners along with these concentrations of slags. So we don't have the proper four catalan, how you would like it with your ash and with everything in place, but that is probably also due to the area, because we are very exposed to the weather, to the elements. It's barely covered up because probably a lot of this economy and use has been going on up until very recently. but we assume from the fact that from the finds we have all across the mountain that there must be an older tradition to do this, and that if we could figure out how to identify the different time horizons of this type of extraction and smelting, then that would be very useful. So here what she wanted to show was, you see here, lime kilns, of course, that are more recent, but you see smelting activities and debris are mostly concentrated in three locations. One is Chowan, so on the other side of the mountain. One is in Margerias on the lower portion, but this one is very close to our side of Orne de Dare on the other side, and has plenty of locations where we have the smelting debris, but also these ash-filled, almost built into natural features remains. What we also have, what did she want to show here? I think yes, there are very often, I mean, they're not very well preserved and they're not conclusive without the slag associated.
You want to try again with the sound?
No, I think we'll just do it this way, and maybe what we could do is upload it for people to review later on, because she explains it beautifully. I'm just summarizing here quickly. So here we have features that are not entirely looking like architecture, but if you school your eye into what the mountain usually provides, there is a clear human change to what was there to fit the intended purpose, which was probably somehow connected either to store or accumulate the iron ores, or then to go into the primary smelting process. What we also have is, of course, other types of use. We have the bidars. We call them bidars. So this is one of those threshing bidars that are used in locations where the wind blows over it, and we have a lot of remains even nowadays of threshing residues, and we have the retaining walls that again very often have pottery in them, and here we see already not the whole length of use, but we see that there is older material in there too. And we have bidars for the production of charcoal, which are used even up to this day. So here, and some of them are located in parts of pathways that are now not used anymore. Very often we found pathways that we used because otherwise it's almost inaccessible, and from the way they are now in disrepair and unused since at least several generations, the use of the mountain shifts and can be traced through these excessive paths that give access to them. And what we have here, just to show you, so this is even on the mountain nowadays, there is still charcoal production going on, and it is a very careful and, in a way, long-term thinking way how they cut the trees. You can see that a lot of these trees show regular use, but use that will not destroy the tree, but keep it from regrowing exactly the parts that you need for this type of activity. Here we have a typical, again, bidar, and here another typical bidar. This is one that has lots of layers of ash, so clearly for charcoal production. This one is probably, again, one of the ones for grain. And, oops, mashara, yeah. This is the trails that the Association for the Protection of Jabal Musa has created, but we have found some trails that are older and not used anymore. Often they followed the traditional trails when they were creating the trail paths for the tourists and for people to enjoy the mountain. But some of them are older trail paths that we found that, from what we can find in them, go back at least several centuries, but probably much longer. This is what some of these trail paths look like nowadays. They don't look like much, but if you want to get into that mountain, then they are highly useful even to us nowadays, because otherwise it's almost impenetrable. And this is, so I would really encourage you, Jennie did a beautiful presentation of these things, much more thorough and much more in-depth, with all the knowledge that they accumulated through their hours and hours of working on the mountain. And I hope we can make the PowerPoint with the voiceover accessible. But she also, the survey team, of course, was working with our representative, Tanya Zavin, with the Director General, but also with the staff of the association and people that live around the mountains. So this is also one thing that is very gratifying to us, to use the local knowledge of generations of use and life with the mountain and the resources of the mountain as one of our inspirations to go back into history and bring it together. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Bettina and Hermann. That was really interesting to see. And now we have time for some questions. I was just wondering, to begin with, these cedar trees, they are, I think, suitable for dendrochronology, aren't they?
Yes.
Do you have any architectural remains up in the mountains where that could be applied, or is that all gone?
Not yet. So what we actually have in the archaeobotanical record are these tiny chunks. Oh, okay. There are these tiny chunks of cedar. So they're not suitable for dendrochronology yet. Who knows if we will, let's say, get Middle Bronze Age architecture, for instance, with, let's say, really burned logs whatsoever, that of course would be ideal. But so far what we have is not suitable for
it's the situation of a
dendrochronology.
production region without the produce.
Yeah. Well, the tiny fragments are there, but no larger pieces.
Effie, would you like something on the tomb?
Of course. Yes, that is indeed the question I had. I'm interested in the Roman period. Okay. Hello. So it was, first of all, very, very interesting, and it was lovely to see the presentation of the site, because Mahmoud talks a lot about his work with you. Now, do I have to use this? Because I hear my echo. So, you mentioned that in the Middle Bronze Age, okay, there was this, thank you, sporadic occupation by groups of people who would most likely go exploit the timber and then come back. What about the Roman period? You have this architecture there. You have a very small number of people buried, so there wasn't, I assume, a community, or maybe there was a very small community. So what was the demography of the people buried in that tomb? Was it only men who would most likely, women, children?
Yes,
Okay.
all of them. That was the disappointing element. It would have been so convenient if it had been only women, only men of a certain age, whatever, anything. No, it's children, it's young men and women, it's elderly, less in this case, but that might be just due to the sample that ended up in this tomb. We have, of course, plenty of tombs around the mountain. So we're in the Roman period, and usually one of the favorite things is using rock-cut tombs, and we have plenty of evidence for rock-cut tombs around Orne de Dere and on the mountain itself. The other thing is that we have, when we look at Jabal Musa, at the survey, what kind of architecture came for the Roman period specifically, it was usually more connected to religious high peaks with maybe tombs associated, but it looks to me like very small farms, something like small fortified farms, but this is conjecture from what I saw in the anti-Lebanon. We haven't been able to excavate. It was really just noting wall alignments in surveys, seeing that there were natural tomb-like structures close to them, but not inside them. There we are more proper. And in locations that are actually astonishing. We have, because they're very high up, and for us, very difficult to reach nowadays. But there must have been some pull at the time to establish these communities. And as you say, I mean, even with 18 people over a period of 400 years, we cannot say this was a permanent settlement. And there we are also, again, waiting to get, because for now the plant remains have been mostly studied for the Middle Bronze Age context, because they they had better context to begin with. Now we finally got really good floor deposits and context for the Roman Byzantine period, especially with our production areas. So we are curious to see if we have any change in the way, for example, the plant remains talk about how long people, if they produced food or what they produced there, and if we have any indications for a more permanent type of settlement. But for now, I would also think that we are probably more in something Yala, in Turkey we call that the Yala economy. You have another settlement further down, but in the summer, for climatic reasons, but also for economic reasons, you go up and you specialize for several months a year in it. This is something we should keep in mind. We have, either way we cannot say, but I think it is an option that we should at least explore for many of these structures that we found on the mountain from the Roman period.
Thank you very much.
Good. Jelena.
Thank you for Thank you for this lovely lecture. My question is about Islamic periods in this region, because we know, at least from sources, that the Lebanese timber was important to different Islamic caliphates and states, either pre-Crusader or post. So I'm just wondering, do you have any material evidence from different periods that would speak about this importance?
From this site specifically, not at all, because this site was abandoned after the Crusader period. We have a little bit of pottery that sort of fell off the donkey back here and there. We have one small Ottoman pipe, and a little bit of pottery that is later than the specific 12th, 13th century Crusader horizon. But it seems that no permanent, or even, no permanent settlement was there anymore. We also have to remember what Hermann said about the degradation or the overuse of the forest resources at a certain time. I think we might just, but we have to establish that also with scientific means, at that time probably the resources that were coveted by these caliphates were not available anymore in our region. We were already down to the less straight growing, less useful wooden resources and trees that are gnarly but they are good for charcoal burning, but they're not, probably what was there in terms of usable woods had already been cut down way before the Crusader period, probably in the Hellenistic Roman period, I think. But we would like, this is exactly what we want to investigate.
Good. Jan, go.
Very interesting presentation. I have so much idea about the Lebanese ecologies, but now you give me many very good ideas about this. So I have two questions. The first one is I'm interested about the timber trade. Maybe you have mentioned that you have these timbers, there's so many forests, and probably export to the around the Mediterranean. So I'm just wondering the history, for how long time this timber trade could last, from this mountain. I don't know.
When it started, or how long it was? No, we know it started. We know from the Middle Bronze Age that it was already well established, possibly earlier.
Very likely earlier, because we have, let's say, the cedar wood in the Bikar, in the coastal plain, where they just don't grow naturally. Cedar trees need relatively cold winters, so it's, as I said, nowadays at a height of 2,000 meters above sea level. Maybe in the past it was a little bit farther down, but definitely these cedar trees must have been brought down to the coast from the early Bronze Age onwards. We have the early
Roman period, still.
Very likely, yes.
But what you have to think about also, and this didn't come up so clearly, but I think right now we have only these small sites that we see in those upper elevations, and we have the coastal sites, but there is a chain, for sure, an economic and built-up chain of settlements that engage in different types of economies, fruit trees, mountain slopes that are used even for agriculture, for grain. But of course, the big grain factories are in the Bekaa, in the huge plains there. But we have a very diverse economy that we just don't know yet. We know where the roads go, so we just would need to find these sites, and then we could probably piece together the way this trade was done from a very early period up until the Ottoman period. But right now, you saw the mountains, the coastal plain is very narrow in Lebanon, so it's all built up, modern, built up. It is very lucky for us to find sites like that, and this is why it takes us so much longer right now to piece together this information into a cohesive development of how these trade patterns really worked. We just expect that there must be more sites towards the coast. It's not just people, going to Jabal Musa and back and nothing happening in between. These are really highly used and areas where the specialization probably was much higher than we imagine nowadays. Those were not settlements that did everything. A lot of them just relied on their neighbors to provide them with other things.
Yeah. For instance, in the lower foothills, there was an intensive wine and olive cultivation. So we have evidence for that, again, from texts and from the archaeobotanical record, and also from sometimes large pressing installations. So that's something that probably happened to a height of 1,000 meters above sea levels. Above that, olives have problems. Wine can be grown a little higher up even. So such things definitely also need to be taken into account.
And for all of that, be it the agriculture, be it the quarrying, cutting tombs, you need tools.
Yeah.
And in the Iron Age and onwards, what do you make those tools from? From iron. So I'm very pleased to see the iron slag, which will be another specialized production.
Absolutely.
In a certain area where you have the ore, the fuel not suitable for proper timber, so you balance again. And that's what I'm very much looking forward for us to work together in the next few years to explore that one specialist aspect.
Yes.
But as I said, there are so many other overlapping possibilities of collaboration between the AUV, between the Cyprus Institute, that I hope it will grow further and we can develop a long-term collaboration. Thank you very much. Thank the audience for being here. Good.
Wonderful.
You can stop the transmission, please.
And my USB is now in. It's somewhere, right? Ha! It's hiding.
Dangling somewhere.